It was my son Michael's 30th birthday when the words that would change everything were spoken. I remember every detail of that evening with painful clarity. The restaurant I had chosen for the celebration, an upscale steakhouse with dim lighting and leather booths, the gift-wrapped watch that had cost 3 months of careful saving, the hopeful way I'd rehearsed topics of conversation during my hour-long drive to the city where he lived with his wife, Emma. Our relationship had been strained for years, stretching back to his teenage years when I struggled to be both mother and father after his mom passed away. Cancer took Sarah when Michael was just 13, leaving me, William Hayes, a construction foreman with calloused hands and no idea how to talk about feelings, to guide our son through adolescence alone. I made countless mistakes, working long hours to keep us financially afloat while missing soccer games and school events. I was present but often preoccupied, loving but frequently unable to show it in ways Michael could recognize. The distance between us had grown as he entered adulthood, attending college in another state, then settling in the city for his career in architecture. Our calls became less frequent, our visits more formal and strained. Still, I held on to hope that time would eventually bridge the gap. This birthday dinner was my attempt to strengthen our connection, a gesture I hoped might begin a new chapter. Michael arrived 20 minutes late, already tense from what he described as a situation at work. His wife had cancelled at the last minute due to a migraine. The empty third chair at our table seemed to underscore the gaps in our relationship, spaces where others should be but weren't. The evening progressed with awkward small talk about his job, my recent knee surgery, and the unseasonably cold spring weather. I asked about his projects, careful to show interest without appearing to question his professional judgment, a balance I often failed to achieve. He answered briefly, his responses growing shorter as he worked through his second scotch. When the waiter brought his steak undercooked, Michael's frustration seemed to crystallize. A minor complaint about the meal expanded into broader dissatisfaction with the restaurant I had chosen, with the city traffic that had made him late, with the client who was making unreasonable demands at work. "I didn't even want to do this tonight," he said finally, pushing his plate away. "Emma thought it would be good for us to connect, but I told her nothing ever changes with you." I set my fork down carefully. "What do you mean by that, Michael?" Something in my tone, perhaps a defensiveness I couldn't hide, seemed to break a dam within him. Years of unspoken resentments suddenly found their voice. "You always do this," he said, his voice low but intense. "You make these gestures, birthday dinners, Christmas presents, random calls to check in, but they're just surface. You've never really known me, Dad. You've never really tried." The words stung, but I forced myself to remain calm. "That's not fair, Michael. I've always tried my best, especially after your mother." "Don't bring Mom into this," he interrupted, eyes flashing. "You use her death like a shield whenever we get close to anything real." "That's not what I'm doing," I protested, feeling my own anger rise even as I tried to contain it. "I'm just pointing out that things weren't easy for either of us." "No, they weren't," he agreed, his voice taking on a bitter edge I'd never heard before. "But at least I can admit that. You just keep pretending you were Father of the Year when we both know you weren't there when it mattered." The restaurant around us seemed to fade away, the ambient noise of clinking glasses and murmured conversations receding as his words landed like physical blows. "Michael, I made mistakes," I acknowledged, my voice rougher than I intended. "But I always loved you. Everything I did was for you." "No," he said, shaking his head. "Everything you did was for your idea of what a father should provide. A roof, food, college tuition, all the tangible things you could point to and say, 'See? I'm doing my job.' But you were never there for the actual moments, Dad. The games, the school issues, the first heartbreak, the decisions about my future." I opened my mouth to defend myself, to remind him of the times I had been present, the camping trips I'd arranged despite exhaustion from 60-hour work weeks, the college visits I'd taken time off to attend, the late nights helping with science projects. But Michael wasn't finished. You know what I remember most about high school? He continued, not waiting for my response. When I made the varsity baseball team sophomore year. The one thing I was truly proud of, and you missed the first 3 games because of work. Work always came first. I was providing for us, I said, struggling to keep my voice even. Someone had to keep a roof over our heads, especially after the medical bills from your mothers. I know about the bills, Dad. I know about the overtime and the financial struggles. I'm not saying you didn't work hard. I'm saying you used work as an escape from the harder parts of being a father. He took a long swallow of his drink, then set it down with deliberate control. You know what makes you a terrible father? It's not that you made mistakes. It's that you've never once acknowledged them. You've never once said, "I'm sorry I missed that game," or "I wish I'd handled that differently." You just expect gratitude for doing the basic requirements of parenthood. The word terrible hung in the air between us, impossible to unhear or dismiss. In my 63 years, I had been called many things: stubborn, old-fashioned, demanding, but never terrible, and certainly never by the person whose opinion mattered most to me. I felt something shift inside me then, not just hurt, though there was plenty of that, but a profound sense of failure that seemed to collapse the narrative I had constructed about my life. For decades, I had told myself that my sacrifices were understood, that Michael would eventually recognize the love behind my imperfect parenting. Now, confronted with his genuine perception, I had no defense prepared. The expensive watch in my jacket pocket suddenly seemed like another misguided gesture, a material offering where something more fundamental was needed. "I see," I said finally, the words feeling inadequate even as I spoke them. The waiter approached, sensing tension and asking if everything was all right. I nodded automatically, then asked for the check. Michael checked his phone, a habit I had always found dismissive but now recognized as perhaps his way of managing discomfort. "I should get going. Emma will be wondering where I am." I paid the bill in silence, the celebration now unquestionably over. As we walked to the parking lot, the spring evening had turned chilly, a brisk wind carrying the scent of approaching rain. We stopped beside his car, the sleek sedan another symbol of the different worlds we now inhabited. "Michael," I began, not sure what I could possibly say to repair what had been broken, not just tonight but over many years. He raised a hand to stop me. "Let's not do this now. I've said more than I planned to. Maybe we just need some space." Space. The word seemed both reasonable and devastating. What he was really saying, I understood, was that he needed space from me. I looked at my son in the harsh glare of the parking lot lights, this accomplished man who had once been a boy whose tears I had wiped, whose nightmares I had soothed, whose future I had worried over through countless sleepless nights. Despite everything, pride and love overwhelmed me. Whatever my failures, he had become someone remarkable. I could have argued, could have defended my choices, listed my sacrifices, reminded him of the good times he seemed determined to forget. I could have pointed out the unfairness of judging a grieving, struggling single father by impossible standards. I could have told him how I cried in my truck after missing those baseball games, how I kept his trophies on my mantle even now, how not a day passed that I didn't wonder if I could have done better for him. Instead, I simply nodded. "If that's what you need." I reached into my jacket and withdrew the wrapped watch. "This is for you. Happy birthday, son." He took it reflexively, mumbling thanks without opening it. We stood for another moment in uncomfortable silence, neither knowing how to end this evening that had gone so wrong. "Goodbye, Michael," I finally said, turning toward my own vehicle. "Dad," he called after me, a note of something, regret? Concern? In his voice. But I kept walking. Not in anger, not in protest, but because I suddenly understood that my presence in his life was causing pain rather than healing it. Sometimes love means stepping away, giving someone the space they need even when connection is all you crave. I drove home that night through a gathering storm, windshield wipers keeping time with my turbulent thoughts. By the time I reached my empty house, I had made a decision that felt both impossible and necessary. In the coming days, I would not call to apologize, to explain, or to seek reconciliation. I would not send messages or emails attempting to justify my parenting. I would give Michael exactly what he had asked for a space, even if it broke my heart to do so. Sometimes silence isn't surrender, it's respect. My son believed I had been a terrible father. Nothing I could say would change his lived experience or heal wounds that clearly ran deeper than I had understood. Perhaps the most fatherly thing I could do now was to honor his perception by stepping back without defense or demand. So I left without another word, carrying both the pain of his judgment and the love that would never diminish, no matter what name he gave it. The first month of silence was the hardest. I reached for the phone countless times. On Sunday mornings, when we used to have our brief weekly calls, when I came across an article about sustainable architecture that would interest him, when I simply missed the sound of his voice. Each time, I remembered his words and the look in his eyes at that birthday dinner, and each time, I set the phone down again. I established new routines to fill the Michael-shaped void in my life. I joined a local woodworking class, something I'd always wanted to explore beyond the basic construction skills my career had taught me. Under the patient guidance of the instructor, a retired furniture maker named Frank, I learned to shape cherry and maple into small, precise objects, boxes with dovetail joints, picture frames with delicate inlays, a chess set with pieces turned on a lathe. The focus required left no room for rumination, giving my mind temporary respite from replaying Michael's words. "You've got a good eye for detail," Frank commented one evening as I sanded a jewelry box I hoped to someday give to Emma, or perhaps a future grandchild I might never know. "But you rush the finishing. The last steps are where patience matters most." His words carried an unintended wisdom that extended beyond woodworking. Perhaps I had rushed the finishing with Michael too, pushed for resolution and connection before the foundation was properly prepared. 3 months after our confrontation, I learned through my sister Helen that Michael and Emma had bought a house in the suburbs. Helen maintained contact with them, carefully avoiding mentioning these updates during our conversations until I finally asked directly. "He's doing well," she said cautiously. "The architecture firm made him a partner. The new house needs work, but it's in a good school district." "School district?" I repeated, my heart suddenly pounding. "Are they?" "Not yet," Helen replied, understanding my unasked question. "But they're talking about starting a family next year." I nodded, absorbing this information that felt both precious and painful. My son was building a life, making plans, advancing his career, creating a home, and I was watching from a distance, like a spectator rather than a participant. "Has he mentioned me?" I couldn't help asking, immediately regretting the naked vulnerability in my voice. Helen's hesitation told me everything before she even spoke. "Not directly. But Emma asks about you. I think she's caught in the middle." I changed the subject then, not wanting to put my sister in an awkward position. Later that night, I wrote a letter to Michael that I knew I wouldn't send, expressing pride in his accomplishments, acknowledging the ways I had failed him, explaining that my silence wasn't abandonment but respect for his wishes. When finished, I placed it in the jewelry box I had made, then tucked both away in my closet, tangible representations of words unsaid and connections unmade. As the seasons changed, I created a careful structure for my remaining years. I retired from construction management, using my savings to purchase a small cabin on the edge of Lake Michigan, about 2 hours from the city where Michael lived. The property needed considerable work, providing both purpose for my days and an outlet for my restless hands. I expanded the deck to maximize the water view, rebuilt the stone fireplace that had fallen into disrepair, and slowly transformed the overgrown acre of land into a tranquil retreat with native plantings and walking paths. "Place looks better than it has in 40 years, commented my nearest neighbor, an elderly fisherman named Ray who had known the previous owners. "You planning to sell once it's fixed up?" No, I replied, surprising myself with the certainty in my voice. I'm building something to leave behind. For whom, I didn't specify. But in my mind, I pictured future possibilities. Perhaps someday Michael's children might run along these paths, might roast marshmallows in this fireplace, might inherit this place as a testament to what their grandfather had created in his solitude. Through Helen's careful updates and occasional glimpses on social media, viewed through her account as I had never created my own, I followed the outline of Michael's life from a respectful distance. I learned that his firm had won a significant contract designing a community center. I saw photos of him and Emma on vacation in Colorado, his arm around her shoulders as they smiled against a backdrop of mountains. I discovered that he had taken up long-distance running, completing his first half-marathon. In each glimpse, I looked for signs of his happiness and well-being, but also for echoes of myself. The set of his jaw when concentrating, the way he gestured with his hands while making a point, expressions and mannerisms that connected us despite the distance. I saved these observations like treasures, private confirmations that whatever had broken between us, our fundamental connection remained biological, immutable. 2 years into our separation, I received an unexpected package at Christmas. A book about Frank Lloyd Wright with a simple card signed by both Michael and Emma. No note, no invitation for contact, just their names and a generic holiday greeting. Still, I ran my fingers over his signature, recognizing the distinctive way he formed his letters, a penmanship that had developed under my roof all those years ago. I sent a thank you card in return, careful to keep my message brief and undemanding. The book is perfect. I hope you both had a wonderful holiday. The cabin's fireplace is finally drawing properly, makes all the difference in a Michigan winter. This tentative exchange established a new pattern. Occasional impersonal gifts on birthdays and holidays, always acknowledged with equally impersonal thanks. It wasn't reconciliation, but it was a thread, however slender, that connected us across the void. Neither of us seemed willing to sever it entirely, nor ready to tug it gently and see if it might bear the weight of something more substantial. In the spring of the 3rd year of our estrangement, I suffered a minor heart attack while replacing the cabin's roof. My neighbor Ray found me and called the ambulance. It was a warning rather than a crisis, a stern reminder of mortality that required lifestyle changes but promised no immediate danger. I didn't tell Helen until after I was released from the hospital, and made her promise not to mention it to Michael. He has a right to know, William, she argued during her visit to help me settle back into the cabin. What if something worse had happened? Then you could have told him afterward, I replied, stubborn despite the new medications lined up on my kitchen counter. I won't use guilt or fear to force a reconciliation he doesn't want. Helen shook her head, frustration evident in her expression. You're both so alike, stubborn as mules and terrible at saying what you really feel. Her observation stayed with me long after she left. Perhaps Michael had been right about more than I had been willing to admit. Perhaps our inability to communicate openly was a trait he had inherited from me, along with my jawline and tendency toward perfectionism. If so, then the responsibility for breaking the cycle rested more heavily on my shoulders as the father, the one who had set the pattern he now followed. That realization prompted me to make one significant change. Though I still maintained my distance, I began sending slightly more personal notes with each holiday or birthday acknowledgement. Nothing dramatic or demanding, just small truths that might, over time, help Michael see me more clearly. The woodworking classes are teaching me patience I wish I'd had 30 years ago. Saw a high school baseball game in town yesterday. Made me remember how much I regret missing your games. Turning 65 makes a man reflect on his mistake. I made many as a father. The cabin renovation is teaching me it's never too late to improve on flawed foundations. These messages were met with continued polite but distant responses. Yet occasionally, I detected small reciprocations, a photograph of their new garden included with a birthday card, A brief mention of a project he was particularly proud of, a question about whether Michigan winters were as brutal as he remembered from our one family vacation there when he was 10. 4 years into our separation, Helen called with news that made my carefully constructed world shift on its axis. "Michael called me this morning," she said, an unusual excitement in her voice. "Emma's pregnant. They're having a baby in August." I sank into my deck chair, watching the late afternoon light play across the lake while absorbing this monumental information. I was going to be a grandfather. Michael was going to be a father. "That's wonderful," I managed, emotion thickening my voice. Are they happy?" "Over the moon," Helen confirmed. "But also nervous, especially Michael. He asked a lot of questions about Dad, things he never wanted to talk about before. How Dad balanced work and family, what kind of father he was with us when we were very young. Our father had died when Michael was just 4, too early for my son to have many concrete memories of the man. I had often tried to fill in those gaps with stories of my own childhood, but as Michael grew older, he showed less interest in these family histories. "What did you tell him?" I asked. "The truth. That Dad was loving but strict, that he worked too much but always made time for Sunday dinners and bedtime stories, that he wasn't perfect but he was present in the ways that mattered." She paused. "William, I think becoming a father himself is making Michael think about you differently." I nodded, though she couldn't see me through the phone. "That's natural. Perspective changes when you stand in new shoes." "Maybe it's time you reached out more directly," Helen suggested gently. "Offered congratulations, or asked if there's anything they need for the baby." I considered her suggestion carefully, weighing my desire to reconnect against my commitment to respecting Michael's boundaries. "No," I said finally. "This is his journey into fatherhood. He needs to take it without the complication of our unresolved issues. But I will send something for the baby when it arrives." After we hung up, I walked down to the shore and skipped stones across the calm surface of the lake, watching the ripples expand and intersect, much like the generational patterns that were now extending beyond Michael to a new life, a continuation of our family line despite the breaks and disconnections. That evening, I began my most ambitious woodworking project yet, a cradle, crafted from cherry wood with maple inlays, designed to rock gently on curved runners. I worked on it evenings and weekends through the spring and early summer, sanding each piece to satiny smoothness, applying multiple coats of non-toxic finish, testing the balance until the motion was perfect. Into one of the headboards, I carefully inlaid a small compass rose, a symbol of finding one's way even in uncharted waters. I finished it 2 weeks before the baby's due date, wrapped it carefully, and shipped it to Michael and Emma's address with a simple note. "For the newest member of the family. May all your journeys be guided by love. Congratulations, Dad." I didn't expect a response. The cradle was a gift, not a request. But 3 days later, my phone rang with a number I recognized immediately, though I hadn't seen it on my screen in over 4 years. "Michael." I stared at my phone as Michael's name flashed on the screen, my heart hammering against my ribs. For a moment, I considered not answering, fear and doubt temporarily overwhelming my longing to hear his voice. What if he was calling to reject the cradle? What if this was just a courtesy call, a polite acknowledgement before returning to our estrangement? On the 4th ring, I pressed accept. "Hello, Michael." "Dad." His voice sounded deeper than I remembered, or perhaps just more mature. There was a brief silence, heavy with 4 years of unspoken words. "We received the cradle yesterday. I hope it arrived in good condition," I said, falling back on practicalities to bridge the awkward gap. "The runners are detachable for shipping, but the instructions should be clear enough." It's beautiful, Dad." Something in his tone shifted, softened. "Did you make it yourself?" "Yes. Took up woodworking a few years back. Turns out retirement suits me better than I expected." Another pause. I could hear him breathing, could almost picture him pacing as he had always done during difficult phone calls. "Emma loves it," he continued finally. Especially the compass detail. She said it was thoughtful. I'm glad, I replied, unsure how far to extend this tentative conversation. How is she feeling? Helen mentioned August for the due date. August 15th, but the doctor thinks it might be earlier. She's uncomfortable now, ready for it to be over. He hesitated, then added, It's a boy. A grandson. The knowledge settled in my chest like a warm weight. Congratulations, son. That's wonderful news. Yeah, we're excited. Terrified, but excited. He gave a short laugh that reminded me so much of his teenage self that my throat tightened. Actually, that's partly why I'm calling. I waited, allowing him the space to continue in his own time. I was wondering. He faltered, then seemed to gather his resolve. The thing is, we're having a small gathering next weekend. Just family before the baby comes. Cookout at our place. And we thought, maybe you might want to come. The invitation hung in the air between us, unexpected and enormous in its implications. Not just a phone call but an actual reunion, a physical crossing of the chasm that had separated us for 4 years. I'd like that very much, I said, careful to keep my voice steady despite the emotion threatening to overflow. Just tell me when and where. Michael gave me the details. Saturday afternoon, casual attire, their address in the suburbs. As he spoke, I could detect both nervousness and determination in his voice, suggesting this invitation hadn't been made impulsively but rather after considerable thought. Dad, he said just before we ended the call, I can't promise. I mean, there's a lot we haven't talked about. But Emma's pregnancy, becoming a father myself, it's made me think about things differently. I think maybe it's time we at least tried to talk. I'd like that, Michael, I replied, careful not to place too much weight on this fragile bridge between us. And if it helps, I come with no expectations beyond seeing you and Emma and celebrating your growing family. After we hung up, I sat on my deck watching twilight settle over the lake, allowing myself to feel the full impact of what had just occurred. The call itself was significant, but it was the invitation that represented a true threshold. Michael was opening a door, however cautiously, and I was being invited to step through it. The week before the cookout passed with excruciating slowness. I found myself rehearsing potential conversations, anticipating awkward moments, preparing responses to questions or accusations that might arise. I chose my gift carefully, a set of children's books I remembered reading to Michael, including Goodnight Moon and Where the Wild Things Are, their pages worn from years of bedtime rituals. On Saturday morning, I rose before dawn, too anxious to sleep. The drive to Michael's suburban neighborhood would take just under 2 hours, but I allowed extra time, both for possible traffic and to compose myself before arrival. I dressed in casual clothes as instructed, khaki shorts and a blue button-down shirt I hoped struck the right balance between effort and ease. As I navigated the final turns into their neighborhood, following GPS instructions through streets lined with young trees and newer homes, my hands grew damp on the steering wheel. When I pulled up in front of the address Michael had provided, I sat for a moment gathering courage. The house was a handsome 2-story colonial with black shutters and a recently landscaped front yard. A basketball hoop stood in the driveway, preparation for years ahead, dreams of father-son games already taking shape. Several cars were already parked along the curb. Helen's sedan, a couple of vehicles I didn't recognize. Taking a deep breath, I gathered the gift bag and made my way to the front door. Before I could ring the bell, it swung open, revealing my sister's familiar face. "You made it," Helen said, pulling me into a quick hug. "Everyone's out back." "Everyone?" I questioned, suddenly concerned about the size of the gathering. "Just family," she assured me. "Emma's parents, her sister, Michael's friend James from college, and his wife. Small group." She led me through the house, tastefully decorated in neutral tones with architectural elements that reflected Michael's professional eye, and toward the sound of conversation coming from the backyard. With each step, my apprehension grew, until we reached the French doors opening onto a wooden deck. And there was Michael, standing at a grill, spatula in hand. Older, his face slightly leaner than I remembered, a few strands of gray visible at his temples despite being only 34. When he turned and saw me, the conversation around him seemed to fade into background noise. For a moment we simply looked at each other across the space, father and son, separated by more than just the physical distance of a backyard. Then Michael handed the spatula to someone beside him and walked toward me, his expression a complex mixture of emotions I couldn't fully decipher. "Dad," he said, stopping a few feet away. "You found us okay." "Your directions were good," I replied, feeling the inadequacy of small talk, but grateful for its safe harbor. We stood awkwardly until Emma appeared from the group, her pregnancy advanced enough to make her movements deliberate. Her smile seemed genuine as she approached. "William," she said warmly, reaching for my hand. "Thank you for coming. And thank you again for the beautiful cradle. It's absolutely perfect." Her kindness offered a bridge, and I took it gratefully. "I'm happy to be here. And you look wonderful, Emma." "I look like I swallowed a beach ball," she laughed, resting a hand on her rounded belly. "But thank you for the polite fiction." Michael watched our exchange, something softening in his expression. "Let me introduce you to everyone," he said, gesturing toward the gathering. "Emma's parents are visiting from Colorado." The next hour passed in a blur of introductions and casual conversation. Emma's parents were cordial if reserved, clearly aware of the estrangement though tactful enough not to reference it directly. James, Michael's college friend, engaged me in talk about the Michigan cabin, expressing interest in the renovation details that gave me safe, neutral territory to navigate. Throughout it all I watched Michael, the way he attended to his hosting duties, his attentive glances toward Emma, the occasional look in my direction as if checking to see if I was comfortable. He seemed more settled than the ambitious, sometimes restless young man I had known, as though impending fatherhood had already begun reshaping him. After the meal, as guests broke into smaller conversation groups around the yard, Michael approached where I sat at the edge of the deck. "Want to see the nursery?" he asked quietly. "We just finished it last weekend." I recognized the invitation for what it was. Not just a room tour but a tentative step toward something more personal than the group interaction that had characterized the afternoon so far. "I'd like that," I replied, following him back into the house and up the stairs. The nursery was painted a soft gray with white trim, one wall featuring a hand-painted mural of mountains and forests. The cradle I had made stood near the window, its cherry wood warm in the afternoon light streaming through plantation shutters. "Emma's sister did the mural," Michael explained, gesturing toward the peaceful landscape. "We wanted something that would grow with him, not too babyish." "It's perfect," I said, noting the thoughtfulness evident in every detail of the room, the well-stocked bookshelf, the comfortable rocking chair, the nature-themed mobile hanging above where the crib would eventually stand. "You've thought of everything." Michael ran his hand along the cradle's smooth edge. "Not everything," he said quietly. "There are still some things I'm figuring out as I go." The weight of his words hung in the air between us. I waited, sensing he had more to say. "I've been having dreams," he continued, his voice lower now, more intimate. "About when I was little. Things I hadn't thought about in years. Like how you taught me to ride a bike in that empty church parking lot, running alongside until I found my balance. Or the time I had strep throat and you set up a TV in my room and watched cartoons with me all Saturday." He turned to face me directly, his expression earnest and troubled. "Why do we remember different things, Dad? When I think about my childhood now, these good memories keep surfacing. But for years, all I could see were the absences, the disappointments." It was the most direct reference he had made to our estrangement, the closest we had come to acknowledging the words spoken on his 30th birthday. I chose my response carefully, aware of the fragility of this moment. "Perspective changes," I said gently. "When you're a child, What you need most is presence. The absences loom larger than anything else. Now that you're about to be a father yourself, maybe you're seeing both sides of the equation, what it means to give and what it means to need. Michael nodded slowly, absorbing this. I've been thinking about what kind of father I want to be, he admitted. And I keep coming back to the same fear, that I'll repeat patterns without even recognizing them. That's a fear every thoughtful parent has, I assured him. But awareness is the first step toward making different choices. He moved to the window, looking out at the gathering below. I said terrible things to you that night, he said, still facing away. Things I knew would hurt you. You were speaking your truth as you experienced it, I replied, the pain of that memory tempered now by the reality of this moment, standing together in the room prepared for his son. I've had 4 years to think about it, Michael. You weren't entirely wrong. He turned back, surprise evident in his expression. I made mistakes, I continued. I prioritized providing over presence too often. I didn't know how to talk about feelings after your mother died, mine or yours. I did the best I could with the tools I had, but that doesn't mean it was enough for what you needed. Michael's eyes shone with unexpected moisture. Why didn't you say any of this back then? Why did you just leave? The question pierced me with its raw honesty, demanding equal truthfulness in return. Because sometimes words aren't enough, I said simply. You needed me to hear you, not defend myself. And you needed space to find your own way without the weight of our unresolved relationship. So I gave you both the only way I knew how, by stepping back and staying silent. For 4 years, Michael said, a note of lingering hurt in his voice. For as long as it took, I corrected gently. I would have waited forever if necessary. He seemed about to respond when Emma's voice called up the stairs, announcing it was time for dessert. Our conversation paused, suspended between reconciliation and something still unresolved. We should go down, Michael said, moving toward the door. But he stopped beside me, hesitating briefly before adding, but this conversation isn't finished. After everyone leaves, if you can stay a while, maybe we could talk more. I'd like that, I replied, hope unfurling cautiously in my chest. I'd like that very much. As we rejoined the gathering, something had shifted between us, not a complete healing of the breach, but an opening, a willingness to explore the painful territory we had both avoided for so long. And as I watched Michael move among his guests, occasionally glancing my way as if to ensure I was still there, I understood that the catalyst for our reconnection wasn't just the cradle or the impending birth of his son. It was the imminent transformation of Michael himself, his step into fatherhood creating a bridge between who he had been as a son and who I had been as a father, allowing us both to see each other through new eyes shaped by the perspective that only time and changing roles can bring. After the last guests departed, Emma's parents returning to their hotel, Helen driving home with promises to call soon, a strange quiet settled over the house. Emma, exhausted from hosting while 8 months pregnant, excused herself to rest upstairs, leaving Michael and me alone on the back deck as evening approached. We sat in adjacent chairs, watching fireflies begin to appear in the deepening twilight of the backyard. The remnants of the gathering, a few forgotten cups, the covered grill, lawn chairs arranged in conversational clusters, surrounded us like artifacts of a day that had marked a turning point neither of us had fully processed yet. Beer, Michael offered, holding out a bottle. I accepted it with a nod of thanks, noting the brand was the same one I had always preferred, a small detail that suggested some connections had remained intact despite our years apart. For a while, we sat in companionable silence, the kind that had been rare between us even before our estrangement. When Michael finally spoke, his voice was contemplative. I've been thinking about something Emma said to me a few months ago. We were arguing about paint colors for the nursery, such a small thing, but I was being stubborn about it. He gave a self-deprecating smile. She finally put down the color samples and said, "You know you're acting exactly like your father right now." I raised an eyebrow, unsure if this was criticism or observation. The thing is, Michael continued, she meant it as a compliment. She was referring to my attention to detail, how I wanted everything to be just right for the baby. He took a sip of his beer. It made me realize she saw aspects of you in me that I hadn't acknowledged, positive things I'd inherited or learned from you that I'd been taking credit for as if they'd spontaneously generated. The admission hung in the air between us, significant in its honesty. Becoming a father. It's made me look back at everything differently, he said. I keep finding myself thinking, what would Dad have done? Or remembering how you handled similar situations. It's like I've been carrying around this blueprint you gave me without even realizing it. I considered his words carefully. Parenthood has a way of reshuffling your understanding of your own childhood, I offered. Suddenly you're standing in different shoes, seeing from a new angle. Michael nodded. I've started remembering things I hadn't thought about in years, like how you used to leave notes in my lunchbox. Those terrible jokes that made me groan but secretly made me feel special. Or how you never missed a parent-teacher conference, even when it meant driving straight from the construction site still in your work clothes. The specificity of these memories surprised me, small gestures I hadn't been sure he'd even noticed at the time. I've been going through old photo albums, he continued. There are so many pictures of baseball games and school events, evidence you were there for more than I remembered. But in my mind, I'd magnified the absences and minimized the presence. You weren't wrong about the absences, I said quietly. After your mother died, I threw myself into work, partly from financial necessity, partly because it was the one area where I felt competent. Being a widower and single father to a grieving teenager, there was no manual for that. Michael's expression softened. I never really considered how hard that must have been for you. Losing Mom was devastating for me, but you lost your wife, your partner, and then had to figure out how to raise me alone. I made a lot of mistakes, I acknowledged. Chief among them not talking about the hard things. I thought protecting you meant presenting strength, not showing vulnerability. It didn't occur to me that by hiding my own grief, I might be teaching you to hide yours. That's exactly what I did, Michael admitted. All through high school, college, even in my relationship with Emma initially, deflecting difficult emotions, changing the subject when things got too personal. He gave me a rueful look. Another blueprint I didn't recognize I was following. The parallel hung between us, father and son, each struggling with emotional expression, each affecting the other in ways neither had fully understood. When Emma got pregnant, Michael continued, I started having panic attacks. Not about the baby exactly, but about failing him the way I felt failed sometimes. He set his beer down, clasping his hands together. I started seeing a therapist. Did you know that? I shook my head. This was new information. She helped me see patterns, how my fear of inadequacy was tied to my relationship with you, but also how that fear was distorting my memories. He looked at me directly. I was so focused on what I thought you did wrong that I couldn't see what you did right. And there was a lot you did right, Dad. His words washed over me like a healing balm, not erasing the pain of our estrangement or dismissing his legitimate grievances, but acknowledging the more complete picture that maturity had helped him recognize. When I said you were a terrible father, Michael said, voice lower now, addressing directly the words that had separated us for 4 years, I was really expressing my own terror of inadequacy. If I could pinpoint all your failures, maybe I could avoid them myself. And now? I asked gently. Now I understand there's no such thing as a perfect father. Just men doing their best with whatever tools and circumstances they have. He smiled slightly. My therapist would be proud of that insight. I laughed softly, appreciating his self-awareness. She should be. It took me much longer to figure that out. The chirping of crickets filled a comfortable pause in our conversation. In the distance, a neighbor's wind chimes added their delicate notes to the evening symphony. "Can I ask you something?" Michael said eventually. "Why didn't you fight back that night? When I said those things to you, why didn't you defend yourself?" It was the question that had been implicit in our earlier conversation in the nursery, now made explicit. I considered it thoughtfully, wanting to give him the honesty he deserved. "Partly because there was truth in what you said, and I respected your right to express your experience," I answered. "But mostly because I recognized something in your anger that went beyond our relationship. You were at a crossroads in your life, professionally successful but personally questioning your path. The frustration you directed at me wasn't just about my failures as a father." Michael looked surprised. "You saw all that?" I nodded. "You forget I've known you your entire life, even with our recent distance. Some patterns are visible only to those who've watched you grow from the beginning. So you just accepted it? My anger, my accusations? I accepted that you needed to express them," I clarified. "And that defending myself would only have escalated the situation or shut down communication entirely. Sometimes love means absorbing pain rather than reflecting it back." Michael was quiet for a long moment, processing this. "That's a kind of strength I'm not sure I have yet," he finally said. "You will when you need it," I assured him. "That's the thing about fatherhood, it calls forth capacities you didn't know you possessed." As darkness settled more fully around us, the outdoor lights automatically illuminated, casting a warm glow across the deck. Michael leaned forward in his chair, his expression earnest. "I've been thinking about what kind of father I want to be," he said. "And I keep coming back to certain qualities: patience, presence, the ability to listen without immediately trying to fix everything." His eyes met mine. "All things that, looking back more clearly now, you demonstrated more often than I gave you credit for." The acknowledgement touched me deeply, not because it absolved me of my genuine shortcomings, but because it recognized the intentions behind my imperfect efforts. "I was thinking about the cradle you made," Michael continued. "The craftsmanship in it, the precision of the joints, the smoothness of the finish. It represents hours of careful attention to detail, of focused care." He paused. "That's how I want to approach fatherhood. With that same intentional care." "You're already doing it," I observed. "The thoughtfulness of the nursery, the way you attend to Emma, even seeking therapy to understand yourself better before your son arrives. These are all acts of intentional fatherhood." Something in my words seemed to touch a vulnerable place in him. Michael's eyes grew bright with unshed tears. "What if I still get it wrong?" he asked, his voice suddenly younger somehow, revealing the uncertainty beneath his composed exterior. "What if, despite everything, I make mistakes that hurt him?" The question contained all the universal fear of parents throughout time, the recognition that love, however deep and genuine, cannot protect us from human imperfection. I felt privileged to be the one he directed this most honest of concerns to, recognizing in his willingness to show this vulnerability a profound step in our reconciliation. "You will make mistakes," I said gently. "That's inevitable. But they won't be the same as mine, and they won't define your relationship with your son any more than mine defined ours." Michael wiped at his eyes with the back of his hand, a gesture so reminiscent of his childhood self that my heart contracted with tenderness. "The most important thing," I continued, "isn't avoiding all mistakes. It's how you respond when you make them. Can you acknowledge them? Apologize when necessary? Learn and adjust?" I smiled slightly. "Those are the areas where I hope you improve on my example." "I wish Mom was here for this," Michael said suddenly. "For all of it, the baby, watching me become a father, seeing you become a grandfather. She would have known exactly what to do, what to say." The mention of Sarah, something we had both generally avoided, felt like the removal of the final barrier between us. Her absence had shaped both our lives, created the circumstances of our struggles, yet we had rarely spoken of it directly. "She would have been incredibly proud of you," I said, allowing myself to imagine Sarah here, her hand on Michael's shoulder, her wise counsel guiding us both. And she would have been the most doting grandmother imaginable. "Tell me something about her I might not remember," Michael requested, his expression open in a way I hadn't seen in years. "Something from before I was born." As the night deepened around us, we began to share stories, my memories of Sarah during our courtship and early marriage, Michael's childhood recollections of her, both of us filling in different pieces of the mosaic that was her life and influence. For the first time in perhaps decades, we spoke of her not as an absence to be navigated around but as a presence to be celebrated and remembered. In that conversation, something profound was happening beyond the words themselves. We were reconstructing our shared history, acknowledging both the painful parts and the beautiful ones, creating a more complete and honest narrative that could accommodate both our perspectives. When Emma appeared at the sliding door in her robe, informing Michael it was nearly midnight, we were both surprised by how much time had passed. "I should get going," I said, rising from my chair. "It's a long drive back." Michael stood as well. "You could stay," he offered. "The guest room is made up. And we could continue this tomorrow." The invitation to stay, to continue, to extend this newfound connection beyond a single evening, carried weight beyond its practical suggestion. It was an opening toward a future relationship, not just a reconciliation of the past. "I'd like that," I said simply. As I followed Michael inside, I realized we had accomplished something remarkable in these hours of honest conversation. We hadn't erased the hurt or magically resolved every tension between us, but we had achieved something perhaps more valuable, a mutual understanding that allowed each of us to see the other more completely, with compassion for the struggles and recognition of the good intentions that had always existed beneath the surface of our conflicts. In acknowledging our parallel journeys, mine as an imperfect father doing my best with limited tools, his as a son grappling with both appreciation and disappointment, we had found common ground in our shared humanity. And in Michael's impending fatherhood, we had discovered a new perspective that allowed us both to look forward rather than backward, to focus on the continuation of our family story rather than the chapters that had been difficult to write. As I settled into the guest room that night, I felt a sense of peace that had eluded me for years. Not because everything was resolved, but because we had created space for resolution to gradually unfold. The compass rose I had inlaid in the cradle seemed an apt metaphor now. We had found our bearings again, father and son navigating together toward a future neither of us could fully predict but both now chose to approach side by side rather than apart. The weeks following our reconciliation took on an almost dreamlike quality. I extended my stay for 2 days, during which Michael showed me around their neighborhood, introduced me to their daily routines, and even invited me to accompany them to a doctor's appointment where I heard my grandson's heartbeat for the first time. The sound, rapid, insistent, full of potential, brought unexpected tears to my eyes, a reaction Michael noticed with a gentle squeeze to my shoulder. When I finally returned to my cabin, it was with plans already in place for my return in August, closer to Emma's due date. The solitude that had been my constant companion for 4 years suddenly felt different, not a permanent condition but a temporary state between connections. I threw myself into preparations, both practical and emotional. I completed several outstanding projects on the cabin, knowing I might be away for an extended period. I read books on modern grandparenting, smiling at how much had changed since Michael was born. I even joined a text group with Helen and Michael, the 3 of us sharing daily messages that gradually rebuilt the easy familiarity we had once known. "Emma's craving watermelon at midnight," Michael texted one evening. "Is this normal or should I worry about her electrolyte balance?" "Completely normal," Helen responded. "I wanted nothing but frozen grapes when I was pregnant with the twins." "Your mother ate pickle sandwiches for a month straight before you were born," I added, the memory both bittersweet and suddenly precious now that I could share it freely. "Just be grateful watermelon is in season." These small exchanges, ordinary, domestic, unremarkable in their content, were profound in their significance. Each represented another stitch in the fabric of our family that was being rewoven, stronger now for having been tested and consciously repaired. 2 weeks before Emma's due date, Michael called with urgency in his voice. "Her water broke," he said without preamble when I answered. "We're heading to the hospital now. It's early, but the doctor says everything looks good." "I'm on my way," I replied, already moving toward my closet for the pre-packed bag I had prepared for exactly this scenario. "Text me the hospital details. I'll be there as soon as I can." The drive to the city passed in a blur of anticipation and memory. I found myself recalling Michael's birth, the 18 hours of labor Sarah had endured, my own helpless pacing in hospital corridors, the indescribable moment when the nurse had placed my son in my arms for the first time. Now Michael would experience that transformative moment himself, entering a role that would redefine him forever. By the time I reached the hospital, labor had progressed rapidly. Helen met me in the waiting room, informing me that Emma was already fully dilated and beginning to push. "Michael said to tell you they're using the breathing techniques you taught him on the phone last week," she added with a smile. "Apparently they're actually helping." I sat beside my sister, both of us alternating between nervous conversation and companionable silence as the minutes stretched into hours. Finally, just as evening settled outside the hospital windows, Michael appeared in the doorway, still wearing scrubs, his face transformed by an expression I recognized immediately. The awestruck look of a man who has just witnessed the miracle of his child entering the world. "He's here," he said simply, his voice thick with emotion. 7 pounds 3 ounces. Perfect in every way. Helen and I rose simultaneously, enveloping him in a group embrace that conveyed what words couldn't adequately express: our shared joy, our collective relief, our celebration of this new life joining our family circle. "Emma's doing well," Michael continued as we separated. "Tired but amazing. She's already asking when she can go home." He laughed softly, shaking his head in wonder. "Dad, I had no idea, watching her bring our son into the world, there aren't words for that kind of courage." I nodded, understanding completely. "Some experiences transcend language," I said. "That's why they change us so fundamentally." "Do you want to meet him?" Michael asked, the question directed to both Helen and me, but his eyes remained on mine. "More than anything," I replied honestly. He led us through hospital corridors to a private room where Emma reclined against pillows, looking exhausted but radiant, a small bundle cradled in her arms. She looked up as we entered, her smile warm with welcome. "Come meet our son," she invited, adjusting the blanket to reveal a tiny face, eyes closed, features still swollen from birth, impossibly perfect in that way that all newborns are to those who love them. Helen approached first, cooing appreciatively and offering gentle congratulations to Emma. I hung back slightly, overcome by a sudden wave of emotion that threatened my composure. This was my grandson, a continuation of our family line, a new beginning, a bridge between past and future. When Helen stepped aside, Michael gestured me forward. "Dad, come say hello." I moved to the bedside, looking down at the infant whose existence had already reshaped all our lives. "He's beautiful," I managed, my voice barely above a whisper. "Would you like to hold him?" Emma offered, already lifting the bundle toward me. With practiced movements that returned as if I had last performed them days rather than decades ago, I gathered my grandson into my arms. His weight, substantial yet so vulnerable, awakened protective instincts I had forgotten I possessed. He stirred slightly, tiny fingers flexing, eyelids fluttering but remaining closed in newborn sleep. "Hello, little one," I murmured, studying the curve of his cheek, the shape of his nose that somehow echoed both Michael as a baby and Sarah's family features. "Welcome to the world." I looked up to find Michael watching us intently, his expression a complex mixture of emotions I could only partially interpret. Beside him, Emma smiled encouragingly. "We wanted to tell you his name," Michael said, a note in his voice I hadn't heard before, something almost ceremonial. We've decided to call him William. William Michael Hayes. The words didn't register immediately. I looked from Michael to Emma, certain I had misunderstood. You're naming him. I couldn't complete the sentence, overwhelmed by the implication. After you, Dad, Michael confirmed, his eyes bright with meaning. William, after my father. The most resilient, patient, and forgiving man I know. The honor of it, this most profound gesture of reconciliation and respect, nearly brought me to my knees. I looked down at the infant in my arms, suddenly seeing him differently. Not just my grandson now, but my namesake. A child who would carry my name into a future I would someday no longer inhabit. I don't know what to say, I admitted, my voice unsteady. I'm deeply honored, but are you certain? Emma spoke up, her tone gentle but firm. We're very certain. We want our son to inherit the qualities your name represents to us: steadfastness, integrity, the capacity for unconditional love. Even through our worst moments, Michael added quietly, when I was angriest and most distant, some part of me always knew those qualities were there in you. I just couldn't access my appreciation for them until I grew into a better understanding of what they cost you to maintain. I looked again at the infant, at William, trying to absorb the magnitude of this gesture. Names carry weight, intention, hope. To give a child your name is to honor not just the person but what they represent in your life story. May I tell him something? I asked, surprising myself with the request. Michael nodded, moving closer with Emma to witness this first private communication between grandfather and grandson. I lowered my voice to a near whisper, speaking directly to the sleeping infant. Hello, William. I'm your grandfather, your namesake. You won't remember this moment, but I want you to know that you were born into great love, not just from your parents, but from a whole family history that flows through you now. I touched his tiny hand gently. Your existence has already healed more than you'll ever know. When I looked up, both Michael and Emma were wiping away tears. Even Helen, standing slightly apart to give us space, dabbed at her eyes with a tissue. Thank you, I said simply, unable to articulate the depth of what this naming meant to me. I will spend the rest of my life trying to be worthy of this honor. Michael shook his head. You already are worthy, Dad. That's why we chose it. In that hospital room, surrounded by 3 generations of our family, I experienced a healing so complete it seemed to extend beyond the present moment, reaching backward to soothe past wounds and forward to bless future connections. The estrangement that had defined our relationship for 4 years now revealed itself as what perhaps it had always been, not an ending but a necessary passage, a difficult terrain we had to cross to reach this new country of mutual understanding. The days that followed took on a dreamlike quality. I extended my visit, moving temporarily into Michael and Emma's guest room to help during the chaotic early weeks with a newborn. I found myself slipping easily into the role of supportive grandfather, holding little William during fussy periods so his exhausted parents could shower or nap, preparing simple meals that could be eaten one-handed, offering guidance when requested but otherwise simply witnessing Michael and Emma finding their way as new parents. One night, about 2 weeks after William's birth, I came upon Michael in the nursery. He sat in the rocking chair, his son asleep against his chest, his expression contemplative in the soft glow of the night light. He finally settled, Michael whispered as I paused in the doorway. 3 hours of walking and humming, but he's out now. You could put him down, I suggested gently. Get some rest yourself. Michael shook his head. I just want to hold him a little longer. His eyes met mine. Is this how you felt with me? This overwhelming need to protect, to be present. I nodded, entering the room fully and taking a seat on the window bench nearby. From the first moment. It never really goes away, just changes form as they grow. Michael looked down at his sleeping son. I understand so much now that I didn't before. How every decision becomes filtered through what's best for them. How you can be bone-tired but still find reserves you didn't know you had. He glanced up at me. How you can make mistakes despite your best intentions. The biggest challenge of parenthood, I acknowledged. Learning to forgive yourself for your inevitable imperfections while still striving to be better tomorrow than you were today. I owe you an apology, Michael said quietly, for judging you so harshly without understanding the complexities of what you were navigating. And I owe you one for not being more open about those complexities, I countered. For not showing you my struggles alongside my strength. It might have helped you later to know that doubt and fear are normal parts of parenting, not signs of failure. Little William stirred slightly, then settled again, his tiny hand curled against Michael's shirt. We both watched him breathe, mesmerized by the simple miracle of his existence. I think, Michael said thoughtfully, we needed the distance to gain perspective. As painful as these 4 years have been, they allowed me to step fully into my own adulthood, to see you as a fellow human rather than just as my father. And they taught me that loving you didn't always mean being present in the ways you might have wanted, I added. Sometimes love means giving space, respecting boundaries, allowing the relationship to evolve rather than trying to force it to remain static. Michael nodded, understanding passing between us that required no further elaboration. We sat in comfortable silence for several minutes, the only sounds the soft whir of the baby monitor and William's occasional sighs in sleep. We're selling the house, Michael said eventually, the statement seemingly unconnected to our previous conversation. It's too small for our growing family, and the commute to my firm is longer than ideal. I nodded, wondering where this was heading. We've been looking at properties closer to the lake, he continued, his eyes meeting mine with deliberate significance. Within about 20 minutes of your cabin, actually. The implication registered slowly, then all at once. You're thinking of moving near me? If that would be all right, Michael replied, a hint of uncertainty in his voice. We want William to grow up knowing his grandfather, not just visiting occasionally. And after these weeks together. He hesitated. Well, we've all seen how valuable your presence is in our daily lives. The invitation represented more than a geographical shift. It was a conscious choice to rebuild our family bonds not just through reconciliation of past hurts, but through active creation of a shared future. It suggested a level of forgiveness and respect I had hardly dared to hope for during our years apart. I would like that very much, I said simply, emotion making further elaboration impossible. Michael nodded, relief evident in his expression. Good. That's good. As dawn began to lighten the nursery window, casting a gentle glow across 3 generations of the Hayes family, I reflected on the journey that had brought us here. From the painful words spoken at a birthday dinner to this moment of profound connection, our path had been neither straight nor easy. Yet somehow, the difficulties had led us to a deeper understanding than might have been possible without them. In naming his son after me, Michael had offered not just reconciliation but restoration, a recognition that what had been broken could be not merely mended but made stronger at the broken places. And in that small, sleeping child, our family story continued, not erasing the chapters of conflict and separation, but incorporating them into a larger narrative of growth, forgiveness, and love that endures beyond words that wound or silence that separates. Little William stirred again, his eyes blinking open briefly before closing in continued sleep. In that momentary gaze, still unfocused but somehow ancient in its wisdom, I glimpsed the miracle of continuity, the way families heal across generations, each new life offering the possibility of beginning again with greater understanding and intention. He has your eyes, Michael said softly, noticing my attention on his son's face. And your determination, I replied, noting the strong grip of the tiny fingers around Michael's thumb. We smiled at each other across the quiet nursery, grandfather and father united in wonder at the new life between us, a life that carried forward our shared legacy while promising his own unique journey, his own story yet to unfold. In that moment of peaceful connection, the words once spoken in anger, "You're a terrible father," seemed to dissolve completely, replaced by the profound truth expressed in the name William Michael Hayes. Not erased or forgotten, but transformed through understanding into something that had ultimately led us here, to this deeper appreciation of each other and the complex, beautiful bond between fathers and sons that stretches across generations, resilient enough to withstand even our most human failings.